have about a 30-minute session. I'm Dr. Kelly Campbell. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology at California State University, San Bernardino. I'm also the Associate Director for the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations. And I'm very excited to be talking to you today about these tips for couples during this crisis. And as you can see, the image here that I'm going to start out with is, perhaps you've seen it already shared on social media, but it's a couple, an actual couple, not posing, and they're both frontline workers, both doctors, and someone captured them during this crisis in this candid pose, showing affection toward one another despite all the stress they're going through. They still took that moment to pause and show that affection, and it's just so special. So we're going to get into some of those things that people can be doing at home to keep their relationship strong during this crisis and when stress levels are very high. I should also mention this session is being recorded, and we're going to be posting it on the website familiesthriving.com after it's done. And we're also collecting questions through this session. So if you have any question related to your couple relationship, not just on the content that I'm sharing, that where I could respond and help you for what's going on right now and something you might be facing, then go ahead and send that to Rachel or to Heather. They're both participants in this section, and I'll go through about 10 or so slides, and when we get to the end, we'll check in to see if any questions have been submitted. And then the one final thing I'll mention before getting started is that although this is for couples, this information here, I realize that there are a lot of single people out there, and I'm actually doing a webinar tomorrow for singles or for anyone who's using online dating or who wants to use online dating, because that's become ever more relevant during the crisis, and I'll provide information at the end. I'll share that with you so you can sign up. Okay, so let's get started. Before I get into the tips, I want people to think about their own couple relationship if they're in one, or perhaps a prior relationship if they're not coupled up right now, or even their ideal relationship. These circles here, they represent different types of relationships, and there's not really a right or wrong way to be, but you do want to be matched with your partner in terms of what you prefer. And so these circles, they can represent degrees of independence versus interdependence. And so you can see with this first model there is that the two partners are very independent. There's no overlap, and so they are able to do everything on their own without needing their partner for anything. And you don't want that in a relationship, because it puts the partners at risk for infidelity and for breakup. You want a good degree of interdependence where they're relying on one another for outcomes, for need fulfillment, etc. So then we have these other examples, these different models. And so people can ask themselves, you know, where they see their relationship both before this crisis and now. And probably many people may feel as though they had some degree of independence before the crisis, and now they're feeling more like this last one over here, or there's just a lot of overlap where they're together a lot more and they're stuck at home, you know, if they're not working outside the home. And so they're trying to navigate through that new normal, trying to figure out, you know, the natural instinct is to get back to this old way of being. You just naturally want to go back to that equilibrium. But I'm going to talk about how to navigate when your relationship turns a little bit out of your comfort zone and you're overlapping more than you really want to. Okay, so let's get into those tips. The first one I'm going to share is that you should communicate to your partner that you love them. And some people might say, well, we don't really say I love you, but I show my partner that I love them. Whatever works in your relationship is fine. So it can be, as long as your partner feels loved and that you're showing it every day, that's the important part. The problem is when some people feel as though they don't want to say it or show it. And so you have to ask yourself, am I someone who does not feel comfortable or doesn't even feel like I want to tell my partner or show them that I love them? If so, you have to ask yourself why. It's likely because there's some unresolved issues that have built up over time and you've developed a resentment. And so what can you do during this crisis if you're in that place? You'll want to start to focus on the positive. So take that glass half full perspective. Start looking at the positive things in your partner, like their positive attributes, what they're doing right, rather than focusing on the negative. And this is really could require a shift in perspective, but sometimes perspective is everything. In fact, we find that there are some couple relationships where the partners are wearing rose-colored glasses and they don't see their partner's faults and they think their partner is the best person in the world, and it actually functions well. It increases their satisfaction. They're really happy. It doesn't have to be necessarily realistic, okay? Just as long as you are focusing on those positive things, it will make you feel happier. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't address things that need to get addressed. There are going to be some serious issues that come up as any couple goes through their life together. They're going to have those things and they do need to get addressed. But you can ask yourself what needs to get addressed right now and what can wait until after this crisis is over. And you'll do that anyways. Even after COVID has passed, you'll ask yourself, does this really need to get addressed? And you should really only address, we're going to get into the next slide, choosing your battles, but only really address those things that that are big issues. Let the little things slide, change your perspective so that you don't get annoyed by those things. I put on here also reflecting back on what made you fall in love in the first place. And so if you're in an argument with your partner, there's a very famous researcher, I'm going to get into some of his work in this talk. His name is John Gottman. And he talks about when couples are in an argument and they take a little time out to have some time apart and, you know, take some deep breaths and de-stress so they're not in this high emotional state when they're talking about the issue. When they're taking that time out, what's going through their mind? Are they thinking about all the things their partner has done wrong and they're building it up like, I can't believe they did this today and they've done this so many times, and they're thinking through all those things? Or are they focusing on, well, they're really sweet, they've done these other things, they probably didn't mean it, etc. That really predicts whether a couple's going to stay together or not. So when you're taking that, when you're in the heat of the moment and you take a little time out, just start to reflect on their positive attributes, and that can go a long way to resolving the conflict. Of course, extend the olive branch. So don't be so stubborn that you can't reach out and say, I want to, you know, get through whatever it is that's hindering your ability to show love or to express it. And so don't be stubborn. Be willing to extend that olive branch. Be willing to be the first one to say, let's resolve this and let's get through it. Okay, so choosing those battles wisely. Again, John Gottman, the reason why I come back to him is because he's done, he has thousands and thousands of hours of couples together, and he's analyzed them in these incremental details. So he's published a lot on it. But one of the things that he and his wife have found is that by augmenting the positive, the negatives just become less important. And so when I say with this first point that some things are better left unsaid or unaddressed, it's those little things, not the deal breakers, of course, but rather than focusing on those negatives, just try to increase the number of positives in your daily interactions with each other. And they provide, they train therapists, and that's one of the models they use in therapy, is working on augmenting the number of positive interactions per day. Again, choosing those battles wisely, so not everything needs to get addressed, and then not repeating things over and over. So what can happen is that if you start repeating things over and over again, keep pointing out like that you're leaving crumbs all over the house, for example, that can start to eventually lead to this pattern called demand withdraw, where one partner ends up being the one who constantly brings things up, and the other partner shuts down or doesn't want to engage with them because they just feel like they're being nagged. That's not to say, like, you have to imagine a relationship where there really is an important issue and the partner has raised that issue with their partner, and then, you know, the partner's not being responsive to them. That's different. So you do need a responsive partner. And if you find that your partner is not responding to the things you're pointing out, then it may be time to consider therapy, because that's something more serious. But just in terms of those minor things that are not that important, that are more just annoyances, consider leaving them unsaid. And then this last point is again about perception. So just changing your perception of things can actually go a long way to improving your well-being and your relationship satisfaction. I'm going to give you some tips based on what I've just talked about in these first two slides. And here are some ways that you can engage in healthy conflict resolution. So conflict is not something to be shied away from. It's something that is going to occur in every relationship. And it's just really the way that you engage in it that you want to be mindful of. So there's good and bad things to do. So let's go through the bad things first, and then we'll go through the good. What you don't want to do is criticize. And so I mentioned this on the last slide too. And what criticism means is that you're not addressing a specific behavior that bothers you, you're addressing your partner's character or something about them. And so instead of saying something like, you forgot to take out the trash again today, instead of saying that, which is okay because you're complaining about something specific, criticism would be, you're so lazy. And so it's this more global statement. It's really about the trash, but it's now about many other things, and it's about your partner's character. So that's criticism, and you want to avoid that. Contempt is criticism, but with this added level of disgust for your partner. It's actually psychologically abusive to do this. And so there are certain facial expressions and nonverbals that have been identified as conveying contempt, such as eye rolling, for example. But it's basically just a feeling inside of you. Usually it's built up over time. And so you think your partner is lazy. And on top of that, you're showing it to them through these contemptuous behaviors. Defensiveness is, there's so many different examples of it, but it's putting it back on the partner. And of course, this is something natural that people might do because it doesn't feel good when someone either attacks their character, which isn't good, or even points out something specific that's bothered them. It can be a natural reaction to respond defensively. And so it would be something like, if you say, well, you forgot to take out the garbage again today. A defensive response will be like, well, you didn't do the dishes. So it's putting it back on them. And that's not a healthy thing. It'll just go in circles. And then stonewalling, this can be, it's basically a removal from the conversation, but it can be both an emotional removal or a physical one. So you could be sitting there in the exact same room as your partner, but emotionally withdraw from the conversation. So they're trying to address something with you, and you're like expressionless, just watching the television or doing a blank stare or something. That's an emotional stonewall. Another one could be they start bringing something up and you just walk out of the room or leave the house. So that's a physical removal. So these they're called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and they actually are like ordered in terms of the least severe to the most severe. And so when you get to stonewalling, that's the one where you have to be extremely worried that the couple's going to break up. Okay, so if you find yourself engaging in any of these behaviors, let's switch over to the good and talk about some ways that you could improve. So mutual problem solving. So when a partner is expressing a concern, you want to use active listening. If you're watching TV, put down the remote, don't look at the TV, look at them, nod your head, show that you're listening, paraphrase to make sure you got it right. And both partners should be doing this together. So not just one person. The relationship and conflict resolution takes 2. Using I and XYZ statements. So this could take a little practice, but basically instead of saying you forgot to take out the garbage, you need to start with an I, but then you also want to say how you feel, the X, and then target the specific behavior, the Y, and then for Z, it's the situation. And so you could say something like, I felt hurt when you commented on my appearance in front of the children yesterday. Okay, so now you started with I, you said how you felt, you were hurt, you said what the behavior was that your partner did, commenting on the appearance, and you said when it occurred or what was the context in which it occurred. It was when the children were there, it was yesterday. So that's keeping it very specific, focused on one issue. It's solvable compared to you're lazy is not solvable. Okay, the next one, again, focusing on their best qualities. So when you're in that heat of the moment, rather than what we call kitchen sinking, which is throwing in everything imaginable that they've done wrong, you just switch that to, whether in your mind or in talking to them, thinking through what they've done right. I find that it's useful to always refer back to, if you're very upset about something, a greater understanding of their perspective will go a long way toward resolving the conflict. So you need information from them, you need to understand their perspective, and you want to try to get that out of them. And then the last one there, extend and respond to the olive branch. So just like I said, don't be shy to reach out and try to resolve the conflict. Also recognize when your partner is doing that, and don't minimize it or ignore it. Recognize it's being done and respond to it. That's very important as well. Okay, doing your part. And so you want to, even in relationships where there's a breadwinner, one person works, for money outside the home, or right now inside the home for money could be, but one person's working for money and the other one is primarily responsible for the home. Even in those relationships, the housework should still be shared. So those are the happiest ones. So if you want a happy relationship, both people should be contributing to housework, childcare, etc. And this is one of the biggest predictors of women's happiness. So if you find you're in a relationship with a woman and she's not happy, consider whether you're contributing enough to the housework and childcare. Every couple is different, so you have to figure out a solution that's going to work for you. And so you have to talk through it. So ideally, you're each doing chores that you like, and you'd be surprised. Someone actually might like doing the laundry or doing the dishes or cooking or whatever it is. So talk about what are your favorite chores and maybe try to divide based on that. But then of course, there's going to be ones no one wants to do, and just figure out how you want to handle it. You might alternate or whatever it is, you just have to talk it through and figure out something that will work. And then it's not only about housework. So doing your part means doing other things too. So when I say that partners should express I love you, both partners should be doing this. And it's kind of a contagious thing, an infectious thing, that negativity spreads, so does positivity. So do your part to keep things positive, functional, enjoyable. Try to perhaps divorce yourself of gendered norms, because in happy relationships, it's more like people are doing what they like to do rather than what society tells us men and women should each do. So I put planning date nights on there, for example. Each partner should initiate those kinds of things, not just one partner. Of course, if you've discussed it and you already have an agreement in your relationship, this is what works, then keep doing that. But just consider divorcing yourself from some of those gendered norms. Be kind to yourself. And so basically, if you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to be very difficult to care for others. You're going to be giving too much and you're going to get run down. You might get ill. You don't want that to happen. Some people, they're just natural nurturers. They just want to give a lot. Well, if that's you, maybe just think about it in this terms. You can't give to others if you don't take care of yourself. So if that's your goal, you need to take care of yourself first. The other thing that can happen is if you don't take care of yourself, you become very unhappy with yourself, and then you might say something to damage the relationship, and you definitely don't want that. So taking care of yourself involves both mental and physical health, and here are some suggestions, but the list can go on and on in terms of what can get done. Try your best to eat healthy, try your best to get enough sleep. I know that it's difficult right now for some of these things. Alone time, again, that can be a very difficult one right now. If you do have a separate room in the house you can go to, try to do that, or to take a bath, or if you're unable to, then just appreciate the time, like when you just lay down in the evening to rest or to go to sleep. That's some alone time where you can meditate, where you can pray. So take advantage of the places in your day where you can do some of these things. Fitting in exercise like YouTube workouts, just some daily stretches. If you have a backyard, getting out to do some yoga or running or whatever you can do. Just do your best. No negative self-talk or rumination. So you don't want to be repeating things, going over things over and over in your head about what you've done wrong or what someone else has done wrong, or how bad things are right now. So interrupt those patterns and replace them with positive ways of talking about yourself to yourself, and about others too, and about the situation. And so if you have a problem with this and you get really hard on yourself for things, try to think about the advice you'd give to a friend. So if a friend called you and told you this is what happened today, what advice would you give them? And then follow that same advice for yourself. So sometimes taking it outside yourself can help you better understand how to treat yourself. Also, just recognizing things are different right now. You can't do everything, and that's okay. You need to modify your expectations. Okay, and then this last one is prioritizing safety and each other. Probably everyone is very familiar with all these various precautions because they've been repeated over and over, but it's just that both people need to be doing their part. You can't have, I just spoke with a couple the other day where one partner was being vigilant and the other one was not. And so one person is constantly cleaning the home and sanitizing things and staying home, and the other partner is still going out and putting them at risk. So you need to be matched on that. Both partners need to be aligned in keeping each other and the family safe. And of course, there are all the safety precautions I've listed there that we know about through the news. Consider that many people don't have a choice. They're either unemployed or they're forced to work. They're on the front lines and they have added stress right now. And so this last point is relevant to everyone, but especially to those who have this added burden, these added stressors. Is to regularly check in with your partner, ask how they're doing, ask how you can help, and just realizing that you're a team there together getting through this rather than at odds, you know, going through this. That can make the world of difference. That support from your partner, it can really go a long way to coping and getting through the crisis. Now for couples who are actually in real crisis, because my webinar has been for people who are in generally healthy relationships, but there could be some couples who are in abusive situations. Maybe one person's an alcoholic. There's different examples of couples in crisis. If you're in danger, definitely call 911. They're still there to help us. If there's no immediate threat, then definitely consider therapy. You can find therapists on Psychology Today. If you just type into Google, find therapist, Psychology Today, you'll be taken to the page where you can enter your zip code or city, and you'll find several people. Also through your insurance, of course. So they'll have certain providers that they work with. And so contacting them for that list. And then a lot of therapists are doing their sessions now by phone or by Zoom. So that's an option. And then there are national lines you can call, toll-free lines you can call for assistance. I've put the numbers there for you. And then I just like to end before I open it up to questions with something I usually put into almost all of my talks, because when people find out that I study couple relationships, the most common question I get is, how can you make love last, or how can you make marriage last? And so here are some of the tips that I'd like to share. The first one, as I've gone through today, is working at love. So that's what I've talked about today. It's that it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just turn out good. You're going to encounter obstacles, you're going to have conflict. And so both people need to be dedicated to getting through those hurdles together, to putting in what it takes to keep things positive and functional and healthy. The middle point I didn't really talk about today, but it's very important, is that what makes partners last over the long term, and not just last, but be happy, that's the key, are similarities. And so you can never be too similar in terms of what research shows us for happy long-term partnerships. You want to be as matched on as many attributes as you possibly can. But one very important one I'll mention are values. And so like when I talked about both partners keeping each other and the family safe, that's a value. So values are unlikely to change. Other things can change, and partners should be open to feedback and to change on some things. You know, that phrase where people say, well, I was like this when you met me, you can't expect me to change. It's true, you can't expect them to change, but if someone is flexible and open to feedback, that's a healthy thing. But values, they're unlikely to change. And so you want to be matched on as much as possible, but especially values. And another good one to be matched on are the ways that you like to spend your free time. So you want to have a friendship-based relationship where you like doing things together. And so it helps when you are both matched on how you like to spend that time. And then this last one is that you want to engage in new exciting experiences together, because relationships can get boring if they're too predictable. We know that the best relationships, the ones that are thriving, they have a mix of predictability or regularity to them, so you know what to expect, but they're also interspersed with spontaneity and new things that partners do together to keep that passion alive. Because when you have your friendship-based egalitarian relationship, you don't want to get too bored in that. You want to insert those new those new things to do together. And so right now under COVID, that can be planning those little date nights at home, for example. The picture here shows the world record holders for the longest marriage, and they were married 84 years. They both lived till they were 105 years. They've passed away now, but in any case, they're from the United States, so I wanted to show you that. All right, what can you do for more info? Before I open it up to questions, I've put a couple QR codes there. You can use your cell phone camera and you can zoom in with your camera onto the QR codes, and that will take you to the ICDFR's website. That's where I work, as I mentioned at the outset. And from that homepage, you'll see there are links to our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can follow us there. We're going to be sharing a lot of resources with the community to improve their relationships, about parenting during COVID, about homeschooling, and different topics of interest. And then I have a podcast. I've posted some of my archived episodes on SoundCloud, so you can see the link there if you want to learn more about couple relationships. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that I'm giving a webinar tomorrow about online dating. And you can register through the QR code there on the right. Also, I've pasted the link there for you. And I'll be covering topics like how to create a profile, how to make contact, what are we doing now when we actually make contact because we can't go meet up with the person. I'll be talking about catfishing, getting ghosted, and all kinds of topics. So it'll be good for people who are not partnered up. Okay, I'd like to thank the Applied Learning Science team for putting this webinar together, and of course ICDFR. The Applied Learning Science QR code is there for you. And I will open it up to see if we had any questions or comments. I think Rachel might navigate us through that if she's received any.
Yes, so just to let you guys know, if you guys respond to me in the chat function as I'm reading questions, it's anonymous, so no one else can see what your question is. But the first question that we got so far is, in quarantine, it's hard to find time to recharge on your own. We are always around our partners. How do we replace that time?
Well, I would say that you still need to try your best to build it in. And so even if, it depends on the structure of a person's home. So if they're in like a studio, for example, you might not even be able to get any physical space unless you go take a bath. So go do those things, like go take a bath or extend your shower time a little bit. So just, you have to see where in your day you can fit in that alone time, that self-care. And you need to be open and honest with your partner. You need to talk to them about those needs. You need to, there's a new norm, as I've mentioned, with those overlapping circles at the beginning. And so you don't want your partner to get hurt feelings when you say, well, I need some alone time. You don't want them to think it's a rejection of the partner. It's not. It's that you need to take care of yourself in order to care for the relationship and to care for them. But how can they know that unless you have an explicit conversation with them? So just talking about, here's our new normal, here's how our day tends to look, here's how I'm spending my time, and what can we be comfortable with to get my needs met? Here are some of the needs I'm having. What are some of the needs that you're having? But you need that open dialogue to figure out how to do it. And you can still be in the same room together and have that alone time, whether it's, reading your favorite novel or, engaging in different behaviors in the same space. But if you have the ability to get into a physically different space, that would be ideal. But not ideal if you haven't had that conversation with your partner so that they understand why you're doing it. So I would say that's the first step, talking things through and figuring out your actual space restrictions in the home, and then going from there.
Okay. And then we've got one more question. It's, how can couples bring up those smaller things that really annoy a person without nagging?
Well, I guess I wish I had some examples of what those would be, but I would say try to ignore them, because you have to think to yourself, did this annoy me before COVID, or is it only annoying me because I'm here all the time and we're together so much? If it's a temporary thing, I would say try and let it slide, because you didn't even barely notice it beforehand. So it's not really something that's gonna hopefully stick around after this all ends. But if it always bothered you, and if it really bothers you, then you just have to bring it up, and you can't bring up everything. So you can't bring up, 10 things. Just think like, what are some things I see every day, and every time I see them, it just really, and you have to ask yourself why. Why am I getting so annoyed? And it probably comes down to a difference. You know, when I say those similarities are key, it probably comes down to a difference in standards or values or something. So if you go like, I really value cleanliness and my partner doesn't, for example, that could be one place where you say, this is a difference. We're not matched on this attribute. Well, how can we navigate through it? And you need to develop some compromise with your partner. You talk it through. So I don't know exactly what the behaviors are, but I would say, get to the bottom of it. Why does it annoy you? Ask yourself, if it's only because of COVID, in that case, consider letting it slide. And then just don't tackle too many of those things. Tackle just the ones you really need to.
Okay, perfect.
And one more thing I would just say, go back to my conflict resolution slide and use the I and the XYZ when you do it. And consider, you know what else I failed to mention is timing is important. So you don't bring it up while the baby's crying and while you have all these other things going on, and then you start criticizing that one thing. You say, no, let me pick the specific behavior, use my I, XYZ statement, and you do it at a time that's things are calm and it's an okay time to do that.
Awesome, thank you. And then another question is, I feel like I have to take all of the responsibility for the kids and my partner just does the work thing from home. How can I get him to help more?
Okay, so again, it's going to come down to talking things through. And so the thing about it is, like, people think, well, work, you know, whether from home or going to work, either way, that, you know, the working partner thinks like, I'm doing this big contribution by bringing in the money. Like, we wouldn't have any money right now if it weren't for me. So they feel like that's this huge contribution that they're doing, and it is, but it still is alone time. It still is this outlet. It still is time away from the kids and the housework. And so the partner probably doesn't realize your perspective. They think like, I'm doing this big thing over here. The least they could do is, you know, take care of the home, but it's not the least they can do. Don't think of it like that. They're doing a huge thing by what they're taking on. And the one who's working doesn't really understand that. And so I would say it's going to start with talking to the person and trying to explain your perspective and asking for the help that you need. Don't engage in that criticism, but just saying like the IXYZ, like, I feel hurt when, you know, you get off work and you don't think about what my day's been like, or whatever it is. Like, I don't know the particulars, but they can't mind read. That's a big mistake people make, is they think like, obviously they know. It's not the case. It has to be pointed out, and you can't get mad at your partner for not doing something if they've never even been asked to do it. So you have to express what the concern is after you've expressed it in the right way, at the right time. And then they're not responsive. Okay, well, then you have, you know, then you have a real complaint there, because you need a responsive partner. It takes two to make a relationship work. And that could be somewhere where, you know, you might need therapy down the line if they really are being unresponsive. But just don't expect mind reading. Express what the situation is. Explain your perspective. Do it at the right time. And then hopefully they'll be open to change.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and read just two more questions because I know we're going over just a few minutes. So one more is, I come from a family that the phrase, I love you, was not expressed frequently. I've noticed this quality has transferred over to me as an adult. What are some tips I can use to combat this?
Well, I guess the first thing, and I really don't know your situation, but I would ask if you love yourself. Okay, so if you don't love yourself, if you don't value yourself, if you don't have high self-esteem, I would say work on yourself, get to that place, because it might become more easy to say it if you love yourself. And so how do you get to that place? Well, you want to look at who you are, look at your identity. What things about yourself are you unhappy with, and are they changeable? If they're not changeable, you have to learn to accept them. If they're changeable, work on them. So for example, if you go, oh, I always wanted to have a degree and I don't have that, well, start working towards that goal. Or I'm out of shape and I wish I was in shape. They'll start working on that goal. So just working on the goal is going to start to boost your self-esteem, but also accomplishing those goals, of course, does too. Look at the things you want to be good at. Start working at those things. What do you want to be good at? So I would say the first thing is looking at yourself. And sometimes if we come from a family where love was not expressed or conveyed, probably, you know, you do need some work on yourself. I think when you get to that place, it'll be more easy when you love yourself to be able to both love another, but to express that love for another. And then you could take it in baby steps, you know, just give yourself little challenges. Like if you don't feel comfortable saying the words, I love you, say, I care for you, and just build up to it. And it will become normal with time.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, I know I said this before, was I know that it is important to find as many similarities between you and your partner. However, what if some of your values might not align? Are there ways to work through those?
There's a way to respect each other's values, to not criticize each other for differing values. But as I mentioned, it's probably not likely that you'll change values. So I think an identification of what each person's values are and how they're impacting those daily interactions is important. Sometimes just understanding it. So if you say, oh, this behavior, it bothers me, and you actually realize it's coming from these differing values, the explanation itself helps. So now you say, well, they have this value. So it's like, I mean, I don't like it, but can I expect them to change? It's coming from this value. Can they expect me to change? I don't want to change it, so let me respect it rather than try and change it. So, I mean, yeah, people end up in partnerships where they have differing values, and it's, well, perhaps not ideal. It's definitely workable. I would say the most crucial step is an identification of it, because that's how you can understand the daily behaviors that are stemming from it, and just the explanation will go a long way.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly.
And then I know you had some questions too that you wanted to do for poll, right?
Yes. So really
Okay.
quickly, everyone, before we let you go, I'm going to launch a quick poll. It'll be really quick. Just go ahead and select what applies to you. We would appreciate any feedback that you guys have. And once you've done that, thank you so much for your time and joining us today and giving us 40 minutes of the middle of your day.
And these are anonymous. We should mention we're not
Right.
going to, I'm not seeing the results. It's going to reach,
Nope.
they're not going to be shown on the screen. So feel comfortable being honest in your, okay.
Okay, I think we've got everyone's responses. So thank you again for everyone who has joined us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.